And we are live with another edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. I am one of your co-hosts, Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host Andrew Johnson. And Johnson, we are now down to the final four teams in this year's NCAA March Madness tournament. And for a lot of people, it's been a chalk tournament, unfortunately, for people that like some madness in this year's NCAA. But we're all one, or I should say, we are down to the all number one seeds in each region for the NCAA tournament, and it should lead to some very interesting basketball along the way. Two SEC teams, one Big 12 team, one ACC team round out the top four in this year's NCAA tournament, and we will see on Monday night who will be our national champion.
Yeah, now this is a chalk tournament if you're not a fan. Listen, if you're not a real big fan of this sport, you want to see some upsets. And what I mean by that is you want to see a one seed go down early or you want to see a two seed go down early. But these one seeds have been the best teams all year. It was always a conversation between Florida, Auburn, Houston, and Duke. These have been the four best teams all year, and we're getting the four best teams in the Final Four. Now, don't get me wrong. I love seeing St. Peter's make it. I love seeing FAU make it. I love seeing these Cinderella runs. I love, Dunk City. You love a good Norfolk State upset, right?
Yep.
But these teams are all historic offenses and defenses. All these teams are top 10 in offense and defense. For example, Duke number 5 in defense, number 1 in offense. Houston number 10 in offense, number 1 in defense. Florida 2 and 10. Auburn 3 and 8. So these are all excellent teams. It's not like any of these teams do not deserve to be here. And their net rating, 5 points separate Auburn and Tennessee, and 4 points separate Auburn and Duke. So here's the crazy thing. There is a larger gap between Duke's net rating and Auburn's, which is the fourth best team in the country, right? Than Auburn and Tennessee, which is the fifth best team in the country. It is just a crazy, crazy gap in between these teams. And listen, you had a couple big upsets. Like, unfortunately, St. John's went down early, which had one of the best defenses in the country. Excuse me. I watched that team all year. Of course, their offense wasn't that great. But yeah, this is what March is for. March is for upsets, and they're for seeing the best teams play for the championship. And we got the latter this year.
And Johnson, let's break down exactly how we got to this point. I know it's been a little bit just a week ago since the Sweet 16 officially closed down. We saw this past weekend as well the Elite Eight happening, and that's how we've gotten to this stage now with the four teams now meeting in San Antonio, Texas for not only the Final Four, but of course the national championship game. So going back to last Thursday for the Sweet 16, we saw Florida take down Maryland in that Sweet 16 matchup. You kind of expected that game to go the way it went, Johnson. Florida.
It was very competitive, though.
It was
very competitive in that first half. That was a good first half of basketball.
I think the problem for Maryland is, and we kind of knew, like, the whole rumor with Kevin Willard going to Villanova. Now that's officially official. Now he is the new head coach of the Wildcats. But Maryland just did not look like the same team that we expected going into the tournament after this whole rumor, debacle started. And you're right, a great first half between these two teams, but Florida really stepped on the gas in the second half and ran away with this game in that second half. And they move on into the Elite Eight, and we'll talk about their Elite Eight matchup in a little bit. Any other comments before we move on? I move on to the next game.
No, want to talk about Texas Tech, Arkansas, which I think we have a lot to talk about there.
I want to make that the last game because I think that deserves its own recognition because that was probably the best game we've had. I want to venture to say that might be the best game we've had all tournament between that game between those two teams.
You've had Oregon, Arizona. That's also another crazy game.
And speaking of Arizona, how about their game against Duke? You got to give the Wildcats credit. They went back and forth for a majority of this game against Duke. They at one point were down 15 points, I think. It was a double-digit deficit in the second half, and they kept it close with the Blue Devils. And you got to give Caleb Love some props, big-time player in North Carolina, transferred to Arizona, has been there for a while, got another game against Duke, and he put up a great game against the Blue Devils, 35 points, but unfortunately wasn't a losing effort as Cooper Flagg had 30 points in that game. Duke went on to win that game 193, advancing them into the Elite Eight, where they will meet Alabama, who had an absurd Sweet 16 matchup against BYU. 25 three-pointers Alabama made in that game, Johnson, an NCAA tournament record. They shot 51 three-pointers in that game, and the rest of I think they shot 66 times in total. If they didn't shoot any 2-pointers in that game, they still would have won heavily by double digits. That's just how crazy that Bama shot in this game. Probably the best shooting performance we've seen, maybe in just NCAA history. I mean, obviously, it's a tournament record for what they did 3-pointer wise, but one of the more better shooting performances you'll ever see in the collegiate or pro level. And it's a tough way for BYU to go out because they didn't really play bad in this game. They had a really good, strong offensive showing, which is what we expected going into a matchup against Alabama. But they had no chance to stop what Bama was doing in terms of 3-point shooting in that one.
Do you want to hear something crazy? So, what was the combined score of that game? 201 for the listeners at home, right?
I'll do the math right now. Yes, 201.
I always think about the infamous 48-24 Virginia North Carolina State game.
Uh-huh.
Do you know that's almost triple that? Because the combined score, that's 72 combined points. That's almost, so if you play that game for, let's say, not 120 minutes, 117 minutes, you'd get the same exact offensive output in this one game. Yep. Crazy to think about.
I couldn't believe what Bama was doing in that game. Like, just the way they shot. Because I thought eventually they were going to start cooling down, and they just never did. They just kept shooting absurd.
Oh, they cooled down, all right.
Well, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But let's go back to that game you were talking about, Johnson, to wrap up that Thursday night slate. That was that Arkansas and Texas Tech game. And looking at how the game started, it looked like Arkansas was well on their way to moving on into the Elite Eight. I think the stat was for Calipari, he was, 33 or 34-0, something like that?
35-0.
35-0 going into halftime with a 5-point lead going into half.
Yes, sir.
And they had a 7-point lead going into halftime in this game. Texas Tech just really struggled to start that game in terms of offense, and it looked like they were done in the second half as well. They were down double digits. Nothing was going in for them, and it's as if like a switch kind of hit for them, and maybe that the last 10 minutes of that game against Arkansas, they somehow were able to force overtime in that game, and they somehow come out with a 2-point overtime victory, getting the last bucket with just 4 seconds left. A absolute heartbreaker for Arkansas because it looked like they were well on their way to moving on into the Elite Eight, and they unfortunately fall by 2. And Texas Tech somehow, some way, moved on to the Elite Eight, and we'll talk about their matchup with the Florida Gators in just a few moments.
I think we just go straight into it. I don't really have much to say about this game.
I think the only thing I was going to look for was what was the probability Arkansas had. I think I have it right here. Arkansas
is like 98% chance of winning.
Had at the 4-minute and 20-second mark of this game, Johnson. Maybe even I could even go further. 3:21 left in the game. It's 69-61 Arkansas. Arkansas had a 94.7% win probability to win. And they still lost the game because I think Texas Tech, and I think they were down 69. I'm looking at it right now. 69-56 was the score with 4:43 left.
Yep.
Texas Tech would go on to tie this game with 72 and force overtime. So Arkansas just struggled to make any points out of the stretch of the game. Down the last 4 minutes and 43 seconds, they only got 3 points. And that's a tournament killer. When you have a close stretch like that, that's going to kill you come tournament time. And that's exactly why they lost that game, unfortunately. So, and they lose Boogie Flynn as well. He goes to the NBA draft today, so declaring himself. So we'll see how Arkansas does next season in terms of recruiting and stuff like that.
And now, Boogie will be picked anywhere between 20 to 50, by the way, for those that are wondering at home, at least at this point.
Most likely, yeah. Most likely. Now, Jonathan, let's go to the Friday slate that we have for the Sweet 16. Well, let's start off with the Michigan and Auburn game. Michigan keeping it close with Auburn in the first half of that one. It was a 30-29 lead for the Tigers going into halftime. And it was kind of similar to what we saw with Florida and Maryland, where Auburn kind of found their groove in the second half. Michigan was really struggling to make some shots. We finally saw a nice start out of Broome and 22-10 in that game. And Auburn goes on to win 78-65, advancing them into the Elite Eight, where we'll talk about their matchup in just a few moments, where they would take on Michigan State. And Michigan State, how about their game against Ole Miss, Johnson? First half of that game, Michigan State struggling. They were down only 2 points at halftime. That was a really big break for them considering how the game started. Back and forth in the second half, but it would be Michigan State hanging on close for a 73-70 win over the Ole Miss Rebels, advancing them into that matchup with Auburn into the Elite Eight of that region. And then on the other side of things, we saw Tennessee finally getting the better hand of Kentucky and what was probably the most decisive victory we had in the entire Sweet 16, dominating them from start to finish, winning this game 78-65. Defense was phenomenal for Tennessee in this game, made some big shots when needed it the most, and they would advance into the Elite Eight where they would take on the Houston Cougars. Where, how about their game against Purdue Johnson? Probably, if not for the Arkansas-Texas Tech game, probably had one of the more dramatic finishes we've had. Yeah, close second.
In the Sweet 16, because I think there's one game in the Elite Eight that's even a better finish than all this.
I agree with that. We'll get to that momentarily. But how about Miles Uzan getting that last-second bucket off the inbound pass? He throws the inbound pass, finds himself wide open under the rim, gets the lay-in with, I think, about 0.8 or 0.9 left on the clock. Houston wins that game 62-60. And keep in mind, that was pretty much a road game for Houston, considering that they were technically the home team for that game. That game was played in Indianapolis, so Houston barely hangs on to win that game, and it was a very fun effort from Purdue, but they just were not able to get it done, and that would advance Houston to take on Tennessee in that Elite Eight. Now, speaking of the Elite Eight, Johnson, let's go in to those matchups that started first on Saturday. And I think we'll start off with the Alabama-Duke game because that one was pretty much wrapped from the beginning of that one. You kind of got the sense in the first maybe 10 minutes that Alabama was going to be pretty much cooked in this game. Duke was really firing on all cylinders. Cooper Flagg did not have his best game whatsoever, and Duke still beat them by 20 points because, let's face facts, you mentioned Alabama didn't get cold in that game against BYU, but they were very cold in this game against Duke. Their three-point shooting was not on par to what we saw for them in the Sweet 16. And then you had Texas Tech and Florida. That was a thrilling game, and that's a tough break for Texas Tech. That was kind of similar to what they had against Arkansas in the Sweet 16. They were up pretty big late in that one, up double digits, I'm pretty sure, in the last, maybe 3 or 5 minutes left in this game. And Florida, somehow, some way, able to rally off a unbelievable comeback from behind victory, winning that game 84-79. Walter Clayton putting up absolute heroics in that game as well, making some big shots in the final stages of this one, going for a 30 bomb in the NCAA tournament. Says pretty much all you need to know about what Florida has been doing this entire season, and they will advance into the Final Four, where they'll take on the Auburn Tigers, who had a very nice win over Michigan State in their Sweet 16 game, winning that game by the final of 70-64. Auburn had a very nice first half in this game. Michigan State was really struggling to get some shots down. Made a nice comeback in the second half, but Auburn just down the stretch was just too much for Michigan State. And that's considering the fact that Broome for Auburn did get injured at one point, did come back in and made some big shots for the Tigers, and they move on into the Final Four, and they'll take on the Florida Gators. An all-SEC matchup in that Final Four, guaranteed to have a SEC team in the national championship game. And then finally in the Elite Eight, we had the Houston Cougars knock off Tennessee 69-50. Tennessee just got off probably to one of the roughest starts we've seen all tournament long. 15 first half points for the Volunteers. They tried their best in the second half, but Houston was just too much for them in this game. And Tennessee will now make the Final Four. Houston will move on to take on a very daunting matchup in Duke, which should be a really fun matchup considering, as you mentioned, all those metrics for the offensive, defensive numbers that all four of these teams have. It should lead to a very interesting and fun Final Four between all of the one seeds.
Wow, Nick, that's really interesting what you said there. So yeah, you're guaranteeing not an all SEC final, but you're guaranteeing an SEC team in the championship. Two of these teams made the championship, right?
What do you mean? The championship game?
I'm sorry, two of them made the Final Four, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. It's a little crazy when I'm thinking about it, right? Because it's kind of historic. You never really have two teams make this, right?
Yeah, I think I see where this is going.
Yeah, like you'd be crazy. Like I've never seen two teams make it. It'd be even crazier if you had three teams from the SEC made it, and then all SEC teams in the final. That's never happened from a conference before, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I don't think it ever has. Can you correct me?
Definitely has not.
Wait, I think the fourth best team in the Big East in 1985 was a school called Villanova, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And they were an 8 seed entering the tournament, right?
Yep.
Because the Big East was always being disrespected back in the back in the early days, and now it is too.
Mm-hmm.
And the 8th seed made the finals that year. The other two number 1 seeds, St. John's and Georgetown. Wait, those are also Big East teams.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, so are you telling me that a conference has done not only had 2 teams in it, but 3 teams previously in the modern era? That's crazy. That's crazy. I would have never guessed that. All I hear was the SEC is God's gift to basketball.
Oh man. Yeah, I expected that
Is there a
comment as soon
problem?
as you start. No, no, but it's anything. Not saying anything.
It'd be even crazy if the 8th seed and the 8th seed won that year. That would have been even more nuts. But let's continue.
Oh, no, no, I don't know how to follow that one up. I guess let's just talk about these two games itself, Johnson, and let's break down what the lines are for this game and who we think are going to win each respective game, and then move on into the national championship game, and we'll decide who will become our national championship winner this season. So let's start off with I guess we'll start off with the SEC matchup, considering how much you love this conference. We'll start off with the Florida Gators taking on the Auburn Tigers. Florida is going into this game a 2.5 point favorite. The over under at 159.5. So it's really kind of tough to gauge where the over under is going to be for both of these games, because you mentioned how good these teams are offensively, but you also mentioned how good they are defensively. So you really can't realistically tell where this game is going to lie at the end of the day.
This game is easy. Florida minus 2.5. Jalen Broom's not 100%, and Auburn has struggled down the stretch, where Florida has gotten better. Walter Clayton looks like the best guard in America, and it pains me every single day he didn't follow Rick Pitino to St. John's.
So close. So
I
close to
know.
getting him.
So close. So I guess Rick Pitino needs to start recruiting on Easter.
I guess so, yeah. I'll go with Auburn plus 2.5. They were my pick once tournament bracket came out to win the national championship, so I'm just going to stick with them at this rate and see if they can get it done. I know, going back to what these two teams have done against each other this season, Florida, I believe, got the better hand of them the last time these two teams played. I think that was at Auburn as well. And it was a 90-81 victory for the Gators in that one. So going into Auburn to win that game is a nice win for Florida. The only matchup these two teams have had this season. I think Auburn, Broom's injuries definitely is a concern. I think that's definitely going to be a huge factor into this game. I think I'm just picking Auburn at this point just because I've made they were the pick for the beginning of me, so I have to kind of ride with it at this rate. So give me the Auburn Tigers in the national championship game. I'll take them plus 2.5. What's the what's the other Final Four matchup that we have?
In this game, in the SEC Invitational, you're going to have the Houston Cougars versus the Duke Blue Devils. Duke is a 4.5 point favorite, and the over under slate at 136.5. I feel like the over here is a lock. You don't think both these teams are going to score above 70? You're kind of crazy. But with that being said, give me Duke minus 4.5 to win and cover here.
I think, yeah, saying that Duke won't score 70 points is kind of crazy. I know what Houston does defensively, and they've been known for this. Like, they've been synonymous with this for how many years now? Duke's gonna score 70 points. It's gonna come down to, will Houston do that? That is really the biggest thing. Is Houston gonna be able to go back and forth with Duke in this game? That's the probably big concern for me. LJ Cryer is gonna have to go on an absolute tear in this game to give the Cougars any hope. I just don't know if I see it in this one. I had Auburn and Duke as my national championship game to begin with. I'm going to ride with it. I'm going to go with Duke minus 4.5. I'm not going to touch the over under because I am concerned if Houston's going to score a lot of points in this one. I think Duke will reach that mark that you mentioned of 70. I'm not sure if Houston's going to reach that. They might struggle to score in this one against a very talented Duke defense. So let's see what happens between those two teams on Saturday. And that, Johnson, would now leave us to our national championship game. It looks like you have Florida versus Duke. I have Auburn versus Duke, which is what I originally had at the beginning of the tournament. Who do you have cutting down the nets on Monday night and winning the national championship game in San Antonio?
I said they wouldn't do it at the beginning of the year because freshmen don't win in March. So I'm gonna eat my word to say Duke is gonna win the national championship.
I had Auburn winning this game at the beginning. I'm not so certain if, even if they get past Florida, I'm not so certain if they win this game. I think Duke is just that good. I mean, you saw the last game. Cooper Flag doesn't have his best game of the tournament. Probably the worst game he's had all tournament, for sure. And, I don't remember. I could be butchering his name. I think it's Knip. Is it Knipple or something? You know what I'm talking about, right?
I can't say it.
Yeah, I can't say it either. I think it's Knipple. I could be completely wrong butchering that. I apologize in advance. But he goes off for 21. Proctor has 17. Malach has 14. Like like Cooper Fleck could have his worst game of his career, and there's 4 or 5 other guys on the team that could back him up, and he still puts him a 16-point game in that win over Alabama. If that's the case, and Duke is still putting up 85 points, that's a huge concern for any team they're playing, no matter if it's Houston or it's Auburn or it's Florida. It doesn't. I think it's just gonna be tough for anyone to beat them at this point. So I'm gonna go with you as well. I'm gonna take Duke to win the national championship.
Oh boy. Well, as long as it's not an SEC team, right?
I mean, I don't have any bias against them, but
Well, ESPN made me hate them, so
yeah, I know. Is it
remember,
ESPN though that made you?
it really
you
is
hate them?
because it really is because ESPN has an axe to grind against the Big East, and they couldn't prop up the ACC this year, so they went with the
Yeah,
other team they have a partnership, which is the SEC.
that's fair. That's fair. I was trying to take a look at our tournament challenge bracket, and it's not.
I,
You're looking
I'm
pretty good.
leading.
Yeah, you should be good. You should be
If
good.
Auburn wins, I'm good. I have Auburn and Houston, so
I don't
those
even
are the
know
two
who
I
I took.
need.
I think I had Florida and Texas and Duke in mine. Yeah, I did have Florida and Duke, but it don't matter
Look,
because I
you're
had
looking
some.
good too.
I did, but the problem was my other teams were. I think I had Michigan State. I did. I had Michigan State and Tennessee. I had the teams. I had the Elite Eight correct, but I had the wrong other 2 teams. I thought 2 of the 2 seeds would pull it off, at least in one bracket, not my official bracket. But yeah, it's a fortune, Johnson, because now we're at the time of the year where we are closing down on the 2024/25 college basketball season. After Monday night, we'll be recapping the show, talking about the national championship game and the Elite Eight as well, or I should say Final Four as well, and we'll be looking on to next season. We already have the transfer portal going down. It's been going down crazy these last couple of days, and we'll have to wait pretty much a whole. What is it? Try to do the math in my head in terms of how many months it's going to be till basketball comes back. What is it?
7
6
months.
months? 7 months?
7 months. Yeah, because it comes back in like
Late
early-ish November.
Or early November? Yeah.
Like November 7th to like 10th is like depends on whether weekend falls and anything like that. But
Yeah.
like early-ish November. So 7 months after this.
It's going to be a long 7 months, but we have a lot, we have a lot in between those 7 months to cover down on the show. We have the NFL draft's coming up very soon. You and I are going to be discussing that and doing our very own mock draft. We might even do a WrestleMania pod in a couple of weeks. That's coming up as well.
Of course.
So we probably have that coming up. Baseball's obviously in full swing. Just started a few days ago.
Pun intended.
And the NBA playoffs is also on the horizon as well. We have a lot in store here on the show that we'll be breaking down the next couple of weeks and months. But for college basketball, we are down to the penultimate last podcast of this year before we break down the national championship game on Monday or the day after on Monday. So maybe Tuesday or Wednesday night. We'll have to see. And then we'll be waiting the 7 months in between for next season's college basketball year. So we'll have to find out who is our national championship in the year of 2025. But that's going to do it for this week's edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. We started with the field of 68. We are down to the final 4 teams. And the final 4 teams are all the 1 seeds in this year's NCAA tournament. The Florida Gators will take on the Auburn Tigers, the battle of the 2 SEC teams going into the national championship game. The winner of that game will take on the winner of the Houston Cougars and the Duke Blue Devils on the other side. Who will be in the national championship game on Monday night, and who will win the national championship game on Monday night? You'll have to tune in to that game as well as the final 4 games to find out, and then we'll be recapping them here on the show as soon as those games conclude. This has been Nicholas Pavono, joined alongside by my co-host Andrew Johnson for the All Gas No Break Sports Show. Have a great rest of your weekend.